Hey, everybody. Welcome to Road to Lead, your podcast for all things nonprofit succession planning. Joining us today is Sara Cantor. Sara, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I was just muting because we often have sirens running by my house. I live in Chicago, so that may happen again.
New York
Um,
here, so
yeah.
I understand.
My name is Sara Cantor. I am the co-founder and I serve as executive director of Greater Good Studio. Greater Good Studio, we are a human-centered design firm dedicated to the social sector and to helping our clients build a more equitable society. I've been in this role since the company began, although I guess that's actually technically not true because I didn't take this title for probably 3 or 4 years. So we can get into that. The company is, I guess, just over 10 years old. I can certainly tell you a little bit about what I was doing before that.
I'm always curious to hear about that leadership journey, and I use leadership both kind of in the anybody at any position can be a leader, but also just looking at it from the formalized leadership. So I'd love to hear what that trajectory has been for you.
Absolutely. Well, I studied mechanical engineering in college. It was
Mhm.
immediately evident to everyone but myself that I was not meant to be a mechanical engineer. However, I had a very strong, this is kind of a through line for me. I had a very strong need to kind of finish what I started and to
Mhm.
not be a quitter, if you will, which I thought would be, the ultimate failure. So
Yeah.
um, I pushed through and graduated with a, barely B average. It was 3.0, but I got C's in all my Mech E classes, and then I got
Mhm.
A's in everything else:
Mhm.
sociology, psychology, religion, art, music, theater. I took all these other courses that just fueled all my passions and just never put two and two together that maybe I wasn't meant to be an engineer. But I got into engineering because I wanted to solve problems. I wanted to,
Mhm.
actually, my childhood dream was to make toys, kind of like Tom Hanks in Big. And
Oh.
love that movie, love the concept of,
Mhm.
using my skills to kind of create new
Mhm.
things that would make the world better for, people that needed them. In my case, it was children at first. I was like, I make toys and be awesome. And then engineering just wasn't that. It was just
Yeah.
math. It was math upon math. And I loved math in high school, but was miserable in college. And I think the thing I learned the most from my time in engineering school was how to make friends and convince them to help me with my homework. So honestly, it was sales, it was business development before I knew what that was called.
This degree that I paid all this money for. I love it so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. It's totally true. And you can ask my friends, like I was super good at making friends. I just learned it was my survival tactic, right? Meanwhile, I spent a year after college being like, what actually do I want to do? Because it wasn't that. I finally kind of reckoned with
Mhm.
that. And then had a conversation with an alumni of Northwestern who was like, well, why did you get into engineering in the first place? I said, I wanted to make toys. He said, well, have you heard of design? Design
Mm.
is actually, I think, what you wanted to do all along. And I was like, what is this design thing that you speak of? Just had never heard of industrial design, product design.
Yeah.
And so ended up being very fortunate, went to grad school, the
Mhm.
Institute of Design, which is part of Illinois Tech,
Mhm.
and sort of really drank the Kool-Aid of human-centered design,
Mhm.
which is to say, understanding people deeply and their needs
Yeah.
and attitudes and behaviors, and then
Mhm.
sort of translating those needs and attitudes, those insights into solutions, into, in
Mhm.
my early career, products that people would
Uh-huh.
want and need and love. I did that work for many years. I did that work for about 7 years, working as a designer, design researcher, innovation consultant was kind of my jargoniest ever title. And really appreciated being in an industry that was sort of being looked to kind of innovate and solve problems. But I started to feel dissatisfied around the time that my daughter was born. So actually, I'm not actually sure how this first came up. There was one time when I was working at a design firm or consulting firm, and the founder had said to me, this is actually, I haven't really thought about this in a while, but we were talking about a potential new hire, like somebody else to come work at our firm. And that person had made their desire to do social innovation, to work with nonprofits, to work with, social enterprises, maybe work with government. That person had made that desire really clear. They were my friend. So the founder was coming to me to let me know. She said, I don't think we can hire so and so because they're just not going to be happy here. There's not a business in that work. Like we can't,
Okay.
we won't be able to go in that direction. And so we shouldn't hire this person. And I feel like she was telling me for them, but she was also telling me for me. And I was like, that's really disappointing, but also I think you might be wrong. Yeah. And so we ended up, I did a project with, the client was actually Nike. My design firm had a longstanding relationship with Nike. They'd worked on shoes and other products. They'd worked on store design. But this project was actually about youth sports at a societal level. How do we get more kids to play sports? And the route that was determined to kind of get in there was to understand sports-based youth development nonprofits and how do they get more kids to play sports and how can Nike systemically support them. Suddenly, I was doing design research with all these nonprofit leaders. And I was like, where have these people been all my life? They're so passionate and they're so dedicated and they're not scared of anything. My corporate clients had been, I often felt like they were operating from a place of fear, trying not to get fired, trying not to, trying to get promoted. Just in these large corporations, we worked with obviously Nike, but also like SC Johnson and General Electric, Charles Schwab, like all these major corporations. And I just never felt that inspired by the types of projects we were trying to do. Whereas with the sports project, I was like, my God, could these people be my clients? Like, is that a thing? Could I make that a thing? And I went back to when the founder had said, it's not really a business. Like, we can't really do that. I was like, okay, I think we're going to make this a thing. And so, yeah. Anyway, long story short, had my daughter came back from maternity leave and was like, oh no, screw this. When you step away and then you come back and you have totally fresh eyes. I think I'd been tolerating a lot for a while. And when I came back from maternity leave, it just all became so clear to me. I was like, this is not where I'm meant to be. I quit 3 months later and we started Greater Good.
And you started it with your partner.
Yeah, my husband actually, who I guess, we were married already at that point. Yeah, we'd had a daughter, so we've been married for about 3 or 4 years at that point. He kind of pulled me into it a little bit.
First of all, I want to point out that there's been a thread so far in your career, and I remember Sara and I had a conversation before this. Human-centered design makes perfect sense for you. You connect with people. You want to hear what they have to say. You want to sit down and listen and learn from them, which is something that I'm going to talk a little bit about later, because you talk about being on your own journey. And I remember just you talking about looking at your intersectional privilege. I remember this conversation that we were having. I'll touch on it a little bit, but there is a thread. You both listen and learn. As a leader, that's something to really be pulling out this conversation. You listen to that a lot. That person was able to give you insight into what you're really interested in is this, and you listened and you went and you explored it for yourself. I just wanted to point it out because I think that's a really good skill for a leader to develop if you don't have it, but the ability to listen and to actually probe and also to learn and apply is something that I think is really great.
Thank you. I really appreciate you naming that. I can't remember where I heard this, and I don't have anyone to attribute this quote to. I should really find it because it's become almost a life philosophy. But I think it was like a Harvard Business Review podcast or something about, the kind of the best people aren't trying to be good. They're just
Mhm.
trying to be better. In
Yeah.
other words, I'm not trying to reach some destination of like
Mhm.
the pinnacle of success or, I've achieved perfection. We all know that's kind of a, if anything, like a white supremacist illusion.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm trying to be better than I was yesterday.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to just learn from my mistakes, of which there have been
Mhm.
so many. When you go through something that's difficult,
Mhm.
often the only way that I can feel resolution around it is to say, well, what did I learn and what will I
Mhm.
do differently in the future? I think that might be just because nothing frustrates me more than when people kind of make the same mistake twice, even though, again, totally guilty. Yeah, no, just sort of a continuous improvement ethos has kind of always surrounded me, I think.
Very noticeable. So you quit 3 months after you came back from maternity leave, and you knew what you did not want. Speaking of learning, how did that translate when you created Greater Good Studio in terms of things that you did not want to take with you versus how you set everything up? Can you just talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, there were some things that I knew immediately and other things that certainly unfolded over time. But the thing I think we knew most clearly at the outset was we don't want to work with corporate clients. And that felt like a pretty hard line to draw.
Yes,
Even though
you're
over the
cutting
years
off a lot of money.
you're cutting off money. You're cutting off
Mhm.
actually mostly the network that we had,
Yes.
the people who we knew and the
Mhm.
designers and the kind of innovation people that we knew were just sort of all, they weren't dead to us, but they were kind of resting somewhere else. So it did truly feel like we'd almost pulled the rug out from under ourselves. Like, where is our safety net here? I also think I knew that because there weren't a lot of other design firms. I mean, we looked for, comparable or, similar firms that were kind of focusing on the social sector.
Mhm.
And there weren't a ton of them, but we had a feeling that this was going to be a thing that continued. So we just started to kind of reach out to them and learn from them. But also, I think I knew that we were kind of just creating something, like building the plane as we were flying it. There wasn't a great roadmap.
Mhm.
A few things that I knew right off the bat. I'd read a book called Why Work Sucks and How to Fix It.
That's an amazing title. Right to the point.
So many reasons why work sucks, but no. This couple of authors, they'd actually been, I think, HR at Best Buy. Anyway, they pioneered something called ROW, or results only work environment. Now, ROW has since been kind of discredited and they've changed their tune a little bit, but I think the philosophy remains sound. It's basically the idea that we are not going to treat our employees like children. We are going to evaluate work based on performance and not
Mhm.
presence. So
Mhm.
you can do your work wherever and whenever you want, and no
Oh
one is
my.
going to give you a hard time.
That was back when?
2011. And the book had come out in
2011.
maybe 2010.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
Okay.
oh my gosh, reading it, like eating it up, like this has to be how we do
Mhm.
things. Because I'd been a part of workplaces, I think most workplaces,
Mhm.
they want you to be butts in seats so the managers can check if you're doing things.
Mhm.
And, even though certainly it's not like I was always productive at the office, but
Mhm.
we had a
You
culture
were
and
there.
I yeah, you were there to
Mhm.
you ordered dinner, you took cabs home at 10 p.m. I mean, there was
Mhm.
glory in burning the midnight oil at my
Yeah.
previous company and certainly at my husband's previous company as well. He worked for another design firm that was much bigger and even more of kind of like a workaholic culture. So
Mhm.
I was like, we're going to have, basically the same affordances that are allowed for me as a founder. Like I would want anyone who worked for me to have that same level. It's like being a college student. You only have four
Mhm.
classes. You think you have all this time, but actually you have to manage your time
Yeah.
and you have to communicate about it. And that's what we set up. Now, 10 years in, we still have this essential policy. We call it now a mutually supportive work environment. We've kind of
Oh,
changed
I love
the
that.
title of it. Still, the idea is if you need to be out or, whether you want to be out in the middle of the day on a Tuesday because you have to take your kid to the doctor or because you wanted to take a nap, it doesn't
Mhm.
matter. It shouldn't
Mhm.
matter. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? There shouldn't be like good reasons to be out and bad reasons. But anyway, mutually supportive is just the idea that if somebody is going to be out, you, for any reason, we don't care what, you don't have to get
Mhm.
it approved with anybody. You just need to let
Mhm.
everybody know who your absence is going to affect. And,
Okay.
you know, we all need to support each other. So that I felt really strongly about. The other thing that I knew up front was just, and again, this kind of reaction to previous places I'd worked. I worked at a firm that was extremely good externally, so good at business development, so good at landing new clients, and so good at hiring. Really recruiting, they were the shine. So
Yeah.
so so compelling. But internally, it was like a dumpster fire. And I'm
Wow.
sure,
Yeah.
and not to say that they still are, but at the time, I mean, we had 30 people in an office,
Mhm.
one office manager
Oof.
who really only did kind of like the most logistical and administrative
Mhm.
things. Like there's no
Yeah.
HR, there were really few policies, no employee handbook,
Mhm.
like just nothing to kind of guide your employee experience. And so what I saw was a
Oh.
revolving door. People left within a year. And I was like, we are going to invest in operations. We are going to have
Mm.
like a team of people that are really supported to
Mhm.
support this work because this work is challenging. So just
Yeah.
the idea of an equal focus kind of internally and externally, learning about what they did do well in the BD side, but also learning about maybe what not to do on the internal and like employee culture side.
I love that so much. When you're transitioning into that leadership role, there's a lot of focus on doing the things that not doing the things you hated that sometimes you might miss out on, what were the good things that I can leverage and apply here. Even if it looks a little different, fine. There's always good lessons that you can bring with you as well.
It was as much of what to do as what not to do. And I think a lot of that, both my husband George and myself, like we both were coming with a lot of unprocessed workplace trauma as well as inspiration from, the places that we've worked. And we just had to keep working. I mean, the whole first year, certainly I wouldn't have said, oh, I'm the leader of this company. It's just two people trying to get some project. I really felt like the company was just me and him. It didn't feel like an outside entity. When we hired others, we hired
Yeah.
a couple interns and then we hired a couple full-timers. Finally, we could pay their salaries and then we could finally pay me a
Mhm.
salary. Then eventually we could pay George's salary as well. It started to feel like the company was a thing that
Yeah.
existed outside of me. And that was really helpful because it kind of took the pressure off of me to
Mhm.
be everything and
Yeah.
just started to think like, oh, we're building this, I don't know, this this brand, this community, this, whole thing outside of me. It's great.
You've done a lot of transitioning. As you were moving and building the company, everything had to be on you. How did you help the team that you were bringing on? First of all, get accustomed to the way that things were working. Also, how were you able to let go of some of the responsibilities that were on your plate and really equip your team that were around you to do the best work that they want to do?
That's a great question. I think I was our first kind of project lead before we
Mm-hmm.
had that title. Now we have like 5 project leads, but
Yeah.
I think before we even kind of knew what that was, I was serving as kind of the project lead. And so without writing this down, it was like, I'm going to manage the client. I'm going to keep the project on track. There was like 1 in the beginning and then 2, 3, Initially, I hired people who I already knew. We knew them and they wanted to come work with us and we already trusted them. So
Yeah.
to an extent, I've always, I mean, even from that point, I felt like I had a lot of trust in the people that we worked with. But even now, as we've, you know, not perfected by any stretch, but like improved, I think significantly our hiring practices and like audited them for the equity lens and are we being inclusive? Are we reaching the right audiences? All these things. I still think that I've always kind of given folks a ton of trust right away. I think it's sort of like I'm going to trust you unless you make me think otherwise. So
Mm-hmm.
I remember, for example, when we hired our first office manager, and this is a story about, well, it's also that hire was very important to us because it was the first time that we kind of really let go of a lot of the things we'd been doing. And I'll mention that,
Yeah.
but just really quickly, we hired this person. He was so lovely. He was right out of college. He really had no experience, but we didn't know and we didn't really care. We were like, he wants this job and he's lovely, so let's do it. He was like 22 years old, and I remember walking down to the bank because we had to go to Chase to like get him a card and make him a co-signer on our business bank account,
Wow.
so that he
Yeah.
could administer, pay checks,
Uh-huh.
deposits, things like that. And just like sitting in this banker's office. And they're like, okay, your name, da, 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 da. Okay, you're the studio manager. Got it. And I'm like, I really hope that this dude works out because I'm giving him like, he could steal all our money tomorrow.
You're like, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure.
Yeah, like it's a good, trust someone unless they prove otherwise. And it really was great. And he was great. His hire was actually the first time. We were maybe, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 years old at that point. Yeah, maybe 3 years old. We had some employees. I think we were a team of like 5, maybe even 6 at that point. Anyway, and George and I were just running around like chickens with our heads cut off, managing clients and projects and people. And it was so much suddenly. And I remember speaking with someone who he himself had run a design firm and he was now leaving it. And so kind of wanted to like advise or, whatever, help out. He was like, make a list. This is such good advice. He's like, make a list of everything you do. Like literally just write it all down, like all the things that you do. George did it also. And he said, now look at that list and circle all the things that someone else could do.
Wow.
Like they could, it's possible, if you train them, if you gave them whatever tools they needed, that someone else could do. And it was probably, George and I both had like lists of like 50, 60 items, and we were circling most of them.
Yeah.
We were like, okay, you know what? I think it's time to hire an office manager. That person became the person who dealt with utilities, who reordered hand soap for the bathroom, the person who liaised with the landlord. A lot of like just office-y stuff, but also finance and making sure we're getting paid and doing our taxes, all that stuff. And it was so wonderful to unload and realize that actually there were people out there who could do a lot of that stuff better than me. Like really much better than me. We were mediocre at best at a lot of this stuff. And it was like, oh, delegation is amazing because it enables me to do, the stuff I'm good at.
It's very practical, right? There is this feeling when you're in formalized leadership role that you are the one who can do all of the things that you're doing. Maybe it's ego, maybe it's not, but there is, if I don't keep all of these balls juggling, then things are going to fall apart. And it's okay, beloved. You don't always have to keep all of the balls juggling. And that exercise of sit down, write everything that you do, and then be honest with yourself and start circling the things that you don't necessarily have to be the one to do. I know it's difficult, especially kind of in the nonprofit social sector space where we don't have all of the funds in the world. And even when we get to the point where we're like, yes, we should offload this so that we're able to focus. Can you just talk a little bit about, practically speaking, how did you decide what that first hire was going to be outside of like immediate other designers and that kind of thing? How did you decide and how did you plan for it to be able to afford it?
In the very beginning, we had a little bit of savings, like $10,000. That was basically our like initial investment. We had started a kind of a self-initiated project actually, because we had no clients, because who knew, we didn't know anybody yet. We were like, we're going to do our own project and kind of try to put ourselves on the map. And so the idea became that we needed not one, but actually 2 interns. And they were going to be half-time, 20 hours a week or so. George was actually teaching at the time. He still is a professor. So he's, he has to teach a couple days a week. And then I was able to do some other stuff. But basically we started with these interns and we would meet them in the office 2.5 days a week. We were able to pay for them basically out of our savings. We worked on a project that was about public transit in Chicago. And amazingly, we actually ended up winning a TED Prize for the project, which it was funny because the TED Prize was $10,000. And we were like, wow, that's actually like, it's about what we spent. So cool, But we had a lot of time, we didn't have a lot of money, but we did have time. And the time that I was able to put in the beginning, I also, in addition to George having a salary from his professor role, which was absolutely the key to us getting started, was that he had a salary, he had health insurance. That was critical.
Mm-hmm.
But also in that first year, I kind of moonlighted as a design research contractor. I probably
Mm-hmm.
did maybe 3 or 4 other projects that year working for previous employers just to have some money coming in to kind of pay the bills. But I was very intentional about separating that from Greater Good. That's not Greater Good Studio. That's just Sara on the side
Yeah.
doing my thing to like, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember because I worked on a project for like, literally it was about dairy snacks. Like yogurt and string cheese. It was like for craft or some dairy snacks. And I was like, I can't, this is why I'm starting Greater Good. I need to never do this work again. But it does, it paid the bills in the beginning. And then we were, kind of becoming a little bit legit. We had this transit project. We had another project that we did through teaching, and we got an RFP. Our first RFP, it was like, wow, what is this?
Yeah.
What are
Like,
they're telling us what the project is, and they're telling us
uh-huh.
how much money they have. They had $90,000, 90K. Okay. It was
Wow.
a nonprofit in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
What's funny, and I think this is how we knew that we were maybe going to have a business, is that they had already talked to Georgia's former employer. They'd
Oh,
already talked
wow.
to this like big corporate design firm. And the big corporate design firm essentially turned them down. They were
Yeah.
like, we don't have the
A
team. People
90K
aren't that
budget is
interested.
not.
90K,
Yeah.
we do projects for 10 times that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they didn't say it quite that way, but that was how it, I think, felt
Yeah.
to, this small nonprofit that was doing amazing work and had been around for 30 years. So it's not like they were a upstart.
Mm-hmm.
90K for them was really significant, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't to, this other firm. But to us, we were like, wow, this is the most money we've ever seen in one place. Um, and so that was a real decision point because it was like, do we just do this project ourselves? Because I could probably literally do this whole project all by myself. It would be my full-time job for a year, but I
Yeah.
could do it. Or do we hire people? So we were like, I think we can survive on George's school salary another year.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to use this money to hire people. And we hired
Yeah.
2 people full
Yeah.
time, and they
Mm-hmm.
worked on that project. I worked on it too, but I wasn't being paid. But
Mm-hmm.
that money, and it led to another project with this organization. And that was really kind of a launch pad for us. I think having those 2 employees, I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was so scary, right? Going from like, I don't need anything, we have a little baby who costs almost nothing. We can just live on like ramen noodles for another year. But then it was like, oh geez, I'm paying 2 people's salaries. Like they have
Uh-huh.
families, like they need this to pay their rent and their bill, and
Yeah.
that pressure was big. It was really scary. There was some line that some comedian was like, oh, when I started my business, I slept like a baby, woke up every 3 hours crying.
No pressure. You're like, oh, payroll. I have to make payroll. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it was scary, but I really do think that was the right decision because it enabled me to both work on the project, but also go out and try to find other projects with this new piece of portfolio work that we had. And those employees, stayed for another couple of years. One actually stayed for like 7 years, which was amazing.
You brought up a key point here in terms of like when you know if it's the right time to hire somebody, it's thinking about the short-term needs versus the long-term needs. Because if you were just working full-time on this project for a year, you weren't able to go out and get new clients. That would have delayed your growth yet another year. It's the idea of assessing, like, if Sarah's here for 60 hours a week, Sara can't
Mhm.
be building relationships with other potential clients. Nice nugget to take out of this.
That's exactly right. That was the
Mhm.
calculation. And, not that I even necessarily knew what I was doing in regard to like building relationships with clients. Like I was doing teaching, I was like going to conferences. I was just trying to kind of
Mhm.
be where nonprofits were and
Yeah.
trying to figure out, what they needed and how we could serve them. But it really was kind of this moment of like, do we want to stay a solopreneur? Do we want to stay 2 people or do we want to have a company? And it was like,
Mm.
part of it was like, I think we want to have a company because I think we do good work and I'd like to do more of it. And part of it
Yeah.
was, I actually think I might be a decent manager. I kind of want to give that a try. I'd never
Yeah.
really had that role before.
Great segue. So you are both founder and ED, and you did not start out as the ED of the story. And I'd love for you to just share with the audience, that transition to the ED role and, your kind of like reaction to. taking it on.
Probably right from the start, I think we called ourselves just principal or, co-founder and principal,
Yeah.
because that was kind of the title that we'd seen in other
Mhm.
consultancies. For better or worse, George and I kind of made the assumption that we were interchangeable, that we're both founders, we could both do anything. Call me, call George, doesn't matter. Who
Yeah.
comes to the meeting, doesn't matter. One of the two of us, it'll be fine. Actually, we did a lot of things together, right? Because there's nobody else. But after a few years of that, I think a couple things started to change. Well, first of all, just externally, George um, was able to kind of ramp down his teaching because he started to say,
Mhm.
I don't know if I love teaching. I actually really like being at the studio. So I want to be there more. And so we started
Mhm.
giving him a salary. We joked that that was when we hired George, closer to full time, etc. Also, I think our teammates started to say, you guys do different things. You guys are good at different things. Like, maybe we
Mm.
should have different titles for you. Like, maybe you should actually write out your job descriptions. That was so weird. Like, we were like, oh my God, we have to acknowledge the fact that, like, first, we know neither of us can do everything, but also,
Mhm.
I don't know that I can do everything you can do, and vice
Yeah.
versa. Like, you're really good at
Mhm.
some things that I do not feel comfortable with. So,
Mhm.
we ended up, we said, somebody should be executive director. And George was like, it's definitely not me. Even though, I was like, what does that job even like imply? Like, we thought about managing director as a title.
Mhm.
Ultimately it was like this is the title that means that you are the ultimate decision maker. You make the executive
Mhm.
decision. And this is the person who is sort of most responsible for not just vision, but also strategy, like how we actually
Yeah.
achieve what we're setting out to achieve. And George is phenomenal. He's a compelling person. He's just you meet him, you just want to be around him. He was always agitating, let's try this new thing. He's very innovative. And so we decided to call him director of innovation. Because actually it's kind of worked out well. People are like, what does that mean? And he's like, oh, actually, yeah. But he does a lot of our business development. He does a lot of like
Mhm.
building client relationships. And I think I'd taken an interest, and I didn't want to fall into like a gendered role. Like, he's external and I'm internal. I
Yeah.
certainly do lots of external things. The two of us we've had like coaches, and we'd worked on
Yeah.
we'd done some couples counseling to like try to figure out how we relate to each other, because there were certainly moments where, and this might be a common thing for women, like, I do the work, he gets the credit,
Ah,
was
yeah.
sometimes what was happening a little bit. And so we had to kind of work through some of that. But
Mhm.
basically, I finally was like, all right, I'll take it. I'll be executive director. And then I spent another 3 years, like, not really leaning into that role. I think I felt like
Yeah.
I took it begrudgingly, like, okay, someone has to do it. So I guess it'll be me. But I think the reason why is that I didn't feel like I necessarily had deserved it or earned it, because nobody hired me. Like,
Hmm.
I just took the role. I made up the
Mhm.
title and was like, that's what people call me right now. It was like I made
Mhm.
my own business card. And so I didn't feel like necessarily worthy.
Mhm.
Um, and I had a moment at a conference where I met someone who is still just an amazing mentor. But I was really struggling with this, like, why me? Why am I doing this work?
Mhm.
Why me? Why me? And she was like, why you? Why you? Why not you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I started to like kind of get into that mode.
Mhm.
Now I have almost a mantra around it. It's like, I think this work needs boundless supplies of persistence and optimism that
Uh-huh.
I have. I
Yeah.
do have those things. I have a lot
Yes,
of
you do.
persistence, and I have a lot of optimism. And
Optimism, I was gonna say.
it's like,
Mhm.
I might not be the perfect person for various moments of this work, but I do have those things. And so I was able to kind of make peace with it.
It's real imposter syndrome, especially real for women. And the fact that you identified what it was about you that allowed you to be the person for this role. Boundless optimism and persistence. You're like, everything else we'll work on, we'll figure out, but no one is
Mhm.
gonna outdo these things in this role. So I absolutely love it that, to take control of it is to identify what those two, three, four, however, once you start identifying the one, your eyes are gonna be open to seeing a lot more that makes
Mhm.
you the unique person for this role, whether you transition um hesitantly reluctantly, kicking and screaming, or if it's I absolutely want this job and then you get in it and you're like, ooh, do I belong here? But whatever it is, if you can identify for yourself what is it about this role that makes me the person for it, I think that's an amazing place to start.
Yeah, it was pretty helpful. I mean, I was at the conference where I mentioned that conversation was a conference about poverty alleviation, and everybody was talking about their relationships to poverty. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really I didn't grow up in poverty. I didn't grow up near poverty. I
Mm-hmm.
had no formative experiences. I was like, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I care at all about marginalized populations? I'm a white,
Mm-hmm.
cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual woman. Like, I don't have a lot of the identities that we're often working to support. I finally dug down and actually came out with I'm Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some pretty formative experiences when I was a teenager around the Holocaust. I went
Mm-hmm.
to Poland and
Oh
did a
goodness.
trip that
Mm-hmm.
actually you visit the concentration camps. It's kind of every couple of years, Jewish teens around the world, they go to, it's called the March of the Living.
Mm-hmm.
And just sort of came face to face with like, oh, this is what happens when you
Mm-hmm.
let hate and fear merge with power.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we get genocide. The idea that that could still be, those forces are still around today, that there are still people
Mm-hmm.
that are suffering for so many reasons that all have to do with hate and fear and power, was like, okay, this is why whether it's because of my Jewish identity or just having some of those experiences to understand
Mm-hmm.
social injustice, I feel like has, you know, I still make mistakes because I still grew up white. I still have
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of blind spots. And,
Mm-hmm.
I work every day on some of the components of white supremacy culture that are just
Mm-hmm.
in me and in all of us to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel like uh, that starting to kind of understand that, move past the stage of like guilt and shame and get
Yeah.
into like, okay, cool. So I have some privilege here. How do I use it? How do I
Mm-hmm.
take the luck that I've been given and
Yeah.
turn it into a gift, keep taking that luck, taking that privilege and just turning it into, um, gifts because I don't need it. I don't want it. Like I want others
Mm-hmm.
to
Again, continuing that thread of learning and listening, that seems to be, the pattern for your life and your work. So I appreciate that. Want to wrap up, but I did want to just talk a little bit about. I've spoken to a lot of founder EDs. The conversation around what does the transition process look like for you, getting others on your team prepared to eventually take on the role. Have you thought about it? What's that like for you?
I only thought about it really for the first time recently, partly
Mm-hmm.
because I truly love this work and would be happy to do it for the rest of my life. Like, I'm sure of that. But I thought about it actually because we are applying for a loan with a bank to try to get a construction loan to build out an office, which is an exciting sidebar. But they were like, what is your transition or, what does your succession plan look like? And I was like, oh my God, I have to fill this out. I got to write something. What do I say?
Yeah.
And so that was really the first time that I was like, oh, I guess I have to think about this. But actually, I'm doing and I wrote something. I wrote, our founders are planning to do this for the rest of their lives, but at the same time, if one of them weren't able to do it or something else came along, we've got internal people who are amazing. We've got a great brand. We could hire someone external. Like I think it could be okay. If that was sufficient for that wasn't sufficient for like the
The bank's
world,
like,
but it
we'll
was
take it.
sufficient for the bank. Yeah. But what I was going to say is that we are going through this right now on kind of a micro scale. So I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
taking a sabbatical in 2 weeks.
What?
Last year, in response to just all of the burnout and mental health challenges of the pandemic, we decided to implement a sabbatical policy. We had one person take 6 weeks, and I kind of did their job while they were out. And they came back. Another person left for 6 weeks, and again, I kind of took
Wow.
over their responsibility. So
Ooh.
I've been kind of doing two people's jobs for a little while now. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do my sabbatical next. But it's going to be in February and March. And
Okay.
I just put together this document. It's called, what is it called? It's called a coverage sheet. And
Okay.
I don't know, it was pioneered by the other person who left, our director of operations. Basically, just these are all the things I do, which even that experience was kind of helpful to be like, these are all the
Hmm.
things I do. Who's going to do them when I'm out? It's not going to be me. Um,
Don't call Sarah.
and it was both like thrilling and terrifying, actually, to kind
Yeah.
of put this together. I mean, it wasn't all that, shocking. It was like, who's going to guide this project? Well, we already talked about it. It's going to be George. And who's going to guide this
Hmm.
project? It's going to be Karishma. And who's going to cover, 360 reviews? It'll be Jimena. Like we had people, and truly, there was a part of me that was like, oh, maybe I'm not actually even needed. maybe, maybe, maybe I don't even need to be here anymore. They can just, the company can run
Like,
itself.
oh
I was like, it's fine. I can
man.
just walk away. There was a little bit of like that, like ego nursing, like, it's okay. You're still needed. You'll come back and they'll be happy. They won't have totally moved on, but also a real feeling of like, just what a foundation. Like, there were
Mhm.
probably 4 or 5 different people who I was allocated, dedicated, delegating things to, and
Yeah.
going, yeah, this person can totally do that. And this person can totally do that. And
Mhm.
this one might be a stretch, but you know what? They'll figure it out. Like, I trust them. So, yeah, this is like stepping away, even just for 6 weeks, feels like a real act of trust.
Mhm.
Um, and I hope that it, serves as a model for other people to know that they can take
Mhm.
their sabbaticals and they won't be penalized.
Like the entire culture of your organization and how you nurtured and really created a space like that mutually supportive work environment that you're talking about. It's proven in your actions that you're embodying that. Something that we do a lot of where I am at ICB. That is something as I transition into the leadership role that I do want to continue and to grow,
Uh,
learning some more stuff that I can bring into my toolkit. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely.
Sarah, thank you so very much. This time has been really helpful. There's a lot for our audience to learn here. If there's anything that you'd like to close with, I'll just give you the last word.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I have a poster on my wall. It's a
Mhm,
quote that you might be familiar with. I've seen it in some people like put it in their email signature, but I really do look at it and I really do appreciate it all the time. It's
mhm,
Marianne Williamson.
mhm,
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our
mhm.
light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? And I
Okay.
just appreciate it so much. I'm just like, you know what? Why not me?
Why not you? Why not you? And that's a perfect way to end it, especially if you are in that space that you're trying to work through the transition and trying to set yourself up to take on the more formalized leadership role. As Sara Cantor from Greater Good Studios said, why not you? So as she borrowed, why not you? So thank you so much again, Sara, for taking the time. And how can folks connect with you, learn more about your work? Where can they find you?
Well, they can go to greatergoodstudio.com. Everyone's contact info is on the site. You can find my email. It's Sara at greatergoodstudio.com. And then our firm also, we do fireside chats once a month.
Oh,
And you can sign up again on our website to like come and talk about social impact design. And you can also book a sounding board with me if you want to chat about projects or careers or anything like that. I'm pretty available.
fantastic. Obviously, I'm hoping that a lot of people take advantage of just reaching out to Sara because Sara, you have been really interesting. And as soon as I learned about your work, I was like, she would make a perfect guest here. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to hear the other episodes in this podcast. I'm really into it.
Great. All
Okay,
right.
bye.
Bye, Sara.